16. Chapter 16. Weasleys of War. I am assured there will be no problem with your shopping for school supplies by my contact in the ministry, Griphook said, doing his best to suppress the snarl in his voice at the goblin treaty contact. Hermione interjected angrily. From the Department of Regulation of Magical Creatures, like you were a hippogriff or niffler, not a sentient magical species with its own ancient nation, traditions and laws. Rank racist imperialist oppression, that is. Millicent attempted to interject. It's probably better. I mean, Amos Diggory is a racist prat, but light-aligned and won't be a part of any dark family power play. Besides, he's racist enough not to think goblins capable of trickery. If he respected them, he would be more dangerous. Harry had been staring deeply at Noodle working on his legimancy when he got distracted by the discussion, and Noodle drove a return spike of legimancy along his own probe and into Harry's mind. Ah, that hurts Noodle. Help, I'm being oppressed here, Harry cried out in only slightly exaggerated pain. Millicent shrugged. I'm the right wise lady of House Selwyn by manifest right of conquest, as my own current wealth and safety is contingent upon the foundational violence and inherent authoritarian nature of the regime. I of course side with the oppressor. Plus, I'm Slytherin. Being pro-snake is kind of our jam, Millicent argued. Hermione eyed Harry coldly as she administered eyedroppers full of potions to a dozen wild lab mice she kept for Noodle, and a second cage she kept for Hedwig. I didn't spend weeks working out optimal nutritional supplements for the physical and magical development of wizardlins or gobzards, or however you style a goblin-wizard hybrid. I did so for Noodle and Hedwig, clearly the oppressed workers deprived of any representation in the Wizengamot, and not even permitted the right to their own funds here at Gringotts. Plus, Noodle is cuter than you, Hermione said, feeding her last dropper of magical snake enhancement potion to her mice. Harry turned to Neville for help. Don't look at me, mate. Me gran says that arguing with witches is unbecoming a wizard of sense and breeding. Since she turned two of the Auras who tried to arrest me into toads, I tend to err on the side of yes, m'lady. Besides, Noodle does that to all of us. You are the only one who complains. Neville pointed out. Noodle slithered over and gave him a head-butt in approval. I am unconvinced that any snake is part of the proletariat. Doubtless Night Pigeon and his feathered nest mates are being oppressed. Snakes, being naturally too wise to work for any ends but their own, should be properly classed as nobles. Not that we are willing to accept other people's votes, and laws on the whole seem to be something people personally ignore while applying firmly it to people they don't like. Harry translated for Griphook, who did not speak parley-tongue. He nodded gravely. Noodle is correct. The law cannot be used directly as a weapon against you. The restriction on underage sorcery cannot be used punitively against you beyond the level of a fine inside a pure wizarding community like Diagon Alley. There are no legal recourses to be used, and of course, you cannot take goblin guards with you into a wizard enclave. Harry smiled. So violence, then, Millicent demurred. Not directly. Hired thugs. If masked Death Eaters were to attack students getting their school supplies, every witch and wizard would feel attacked. Honestly, it is one of the things that cost Voldemort in the Blood War. If you're going to commit atrocities that will anger your own power base, you have to use deniable assets. Hermione blinked at her. How did you ever learn to think that way? Some sort of childhood trauma, or were you abducted by some secret order of assassins while still in diapers? Millicent shrugged. Tea parties mostly. Mom and Aunt Lydia socialize a fair bit with other old Slytherin families. You learn a lot. What to serve outdoors rather than indoors for tea, what compliments to use to show deference, which to show dominance, and which to show contempt, when it's expected to kill someone in person, and when it's time to drop a bag of galleons off at a certain pub and remark casually that you hear Lord About to Die was feeling poorly. Griphook smiled. Millicent was properly educated. Pass the compliments of my clan to your own. She is indeed right. There will be hired thugs. Not without danger, but hardly in the same class as an actual Death Eater attack or even a proper contract assassin. The lack of control of the time or setting would put off a dangerous professional. Street thugs are about what you could expect. You will need a plan to neutralize them. Harry grinned. We don't need a plan. We need chaos. We need to unleash the ginger apocalypse. Hermione followed Harry's reasoning. The time has come to break the seventh seal and release the twin Weasleys of the apocalypse. End time's truly upon us, she said in mock horror. Griphook looked interested. Weasley, like Cursebreaker Weasley, he's a very capable wizard, but in Egypt on a dig at the moment. Neville corrected him. His twin brothers, Fred and George. The only reason they are not professional menaces is they are trying to keep their Olympic eligibility open. Griphook knew the wizarding world remembered the Olympics of old and followed the joke. They would bring back the laurel for menacing, he asked softly. For skullduggery, tomfoolery, mayhem, madness, misdirection, arson, exhibitionism, impersonation, character assassination, and humor without a license. Harry amplified. Griphook raised his wineglass and toasted. Confusion to your enemies, cry havoc, and release the Weasleys of war. Fred and George received Hedwig with due ceremony and treats, letting her loose in the house to terrify Scabbers and annoy Ron while they examined the heavy parchment she had brought. So little Hermes under a ministry-hired hatchet job, Millie's killed a Death Eater at a dinner party, Neville's had a plant sodomize his uncle, he says no. But the Daily Prophet scandal sheet had a source at St. Mungo's proctology department. And Harry killed you-know-who again, which might be addictive if you do it often enough, bound to be side effects. Fred Reed wants us to come school supply shopping with them. Possible kidnappings, assault, murder by thugs of unknown but probably nasty numbers and intentions. Might annoy various figures in high society and those officials paid to turn a blind eye, said George, reading on. We'd have to be mad, said Fred piously. Why, there could be danger, property damage, damsels in distress, damsels in undress, mayhem, arson, and possibly a riot, cheered George. Only possible riot, said Fred, somewhat concerned. Almost certainly riot, cheered George. How could we ever, started Fred piously. Leave our Eichel firsty, continued George, spooky secondies. Corrected Fred, doing a reasonable Percy impression. Leave our spooky secondies, continued George, without proper Gryffindor supervision. 3 little Hufflepuffs alone in the world, only one seeing eye Slytherin to guide them, and without even a proper shadow to lurk in. Poor Snakelet is almost worse off, said Fred. It would almost be charity to help them, Fred, cheered George. Except we're going to get paid for it, corrected Fred. Best kind of charity, that is. Riots and gold up front. A very Gryffindorish charity, all things considered. George agreed. If Griphook could see the grin on the twin Weasleys' ginger faces, he would wonder if Marley had been closer to Professor Flitwick in charms than her husband would like. It was a very goblin expression. School supplies, with a side order of vendetta. Act 1, Lucius Malfoy did not sit at the Dark Lord's right hand. That honor, if you will, belonged to his sister-in-law Bellatrix Lestrange, her husband and his brother, the unspeakable Rockwood, and of course dear, devoted, and deeply disturbed Barty Crouch Jr. Lucius sat on Voldemort's left. Like Snape and Wormtail, he was useful for a time. But that time would end when Voldemort no longer needed to worry about the Wizengamot, the Iqua, the old families, Gringotts, and the other factions that divided power amongst themselves in wizarding Britain. Lucius was the master of politics, bribes, and blackmail, truly Slytherin pursuits, but one that the Dark Lord thought smacked of weakness and longed to abandon in favor of some Gryffindorish display of brute force. Then the Dark Lord fell. His right hand, every death-eating finger of it, was in Azkaban feeding Dementors and dying slowly as the Dementors sapped them of will, soul, and strength. Lucius and his detested subtle network of favors, alliances, blackmail, corruption, and seduction remained to do his work. If the Dark Lord was restored, it would be the left hand that made it so, and Lucius would stand highest because of it. Lucius had learned Muggle swordplay. He fought rive gauche, rapier, and dagger, as he felt it best showed his flexibility as a Slytherin. While it was the sword that demanded attention, that forced the pace, and delivered the challenge, it was often the dagger that delivered the unexpected killing blow. This was the stratagem he employed today. His sword was more of a cudgel. Honestly, to be forced to employ such low-talent trash. By rights, he should be sending Lord Crabbe and Goyle to do this. They were the magical muscle to his brains after all, but they were as recognizably his tools as his hands, and his hands must remain clean. So low-rent thugs and a simple robbery were the plan. A robbery gone wrong, almost trite really. In the lead up to the last war, the robbery gone wrong had been used to assassinate so many key people that when the war began, it was critical months before they noticed that critical positions were now occupied by new successors to reliable and assassinated seniors that owed their position and loyalty to the Dark Lord. Lucius would of course be present in the crowd, disillusioned of course. He had to see this farce play out, but he could not be associated with it publicly. It just wouldn't do. Today, a half-blood that dared to assassinate her way among her betters would die, and the boy who lived would be so aggrieved by his loss he would not notice a certain diary slipped into his school supplies. A diary a grieving boy might pour his heart and soul into. It was a perfect plan. Fred and George walked openly, Gryffindor robes making them appear as exactly what they were, Gryffindor Hogwarts students. No magic involved at all. They even took their time to shake hands with everyone they met and introduce themselves. Just two big, friendly dolts. Oddly for the pair, they did not travel together, so no one ever saw both at once. The reason for this was shown when Fred shook hands with Aura Dawlish, and George picked his wand from his holster and replaced it with a Weasley special wand. 3 more times, twice with George shaking hands, and once more with Fred, they introduced themselves to the hard-working auras of Dawlish's team that just happened to be having coffee on one end of the square opposite, where half a dozen armed thugs were taking potions to fortify themselves magically and emotionally for the upcoming battle. Fred saw the 6 working the disillusionment on each other to disguise themselves as someone else. It made them look not quite human, as they didn't have a clear idea about who they were trying to be, so the bits didn't really fit together right. Sad, really, said George. Bad form, that. Impersonations have to be personal, or what is the point? Offered Fred. We should, said George. Demonstrate, said Fred, and a plan was born. Harry, Neville, Millicent, and Hermione were walking towards Flourish and Blotz to start their book buying. All 4 of them could feel their acclumency subtly trigger as they became the focus of serious predatory intent. Blimey, Harry, how do you not react to this? I feel like when you used me as bait for the acromantula when we were jogging. Neville muttered quietly. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes in the Slytherin common room. Snarked Millicent. Or Muggle Middle School. Muttered Hermione, then spotting another spike that only she felt she saw a figure grinning on the other end of the square, and said a little louder for her friends to hear. Oh, look, it's my dear friend Aura Dawlish, back from his sensitivity training and allowed on the streets again. What an amazing coincidence, Hermione said brightly through a smile that any goblin would love. Millicent gave a nod. That was well done, Hermione. We may make a gentle lady of you yet. The ambush was not hard to spot. 6 wizards with wands drawn charged out of the alley and shouted, You rich brats, stand and deliver, your gold or your lives. They were clearly hopped up on battle potions to make them resistant to stun, sleep, charm, and other low-level jinxes, so the chances of them having the ability to stop the violence were close to nil, but they were not actually irrational. This was to be a robbery gone wrong, and accidental killing. The robbery had to be public, or they would be hunted as the murderers of a pure blood house lord, and that was not a survivable thing. To say everyone was surprised when Narcissa Malfoy stepped out of the crowd and cast Sonorous on herself was putting it mildly. I am Narcissa Malfoy. I demand you stop this low-bred thuggery at once, or I will be forced to remonstrate you. The seeming Narcissa stated with the arrogance of a pure-blood noble woman. Pure-blood noble women were not used to facing drugged-up thugs in a street brawl, so could be, in the crowd's opinion, forgiven for having overestimated the ability of her name to stop charging hooligans. A wave of stunner bolts and 1 bone breaker shot at her, and only a quickly raised and screamed, Pratigo. Put a shield in front of her, not that it looked to last long under the pounding. Unseen from the crowd, an older redhead with a wand cast a very subtle and potent illusion 6 times in quick succession. As the illusion did not touch the targets, and as they were hopped up on battle potions and thinking far too aggressively, they had no chance to notice the spell cast on their clothing. After all, battle potions focused your senses on anything related to attack and defense. They didn't really care if your clothes were invisible or not. Lady Malfoy did. With a maidenly squeal, she dropped her wand in fright and shouted, Help, perverts, perverts, perverts. A decent woman is being accosted by dirty perverts, or will no big, strong ginger hero save me? She offered, turning her well-bred and beautiful face to the crowd. The crowd too began to scream, as it was revealed that indeed the 6 charging thugs were completely naked. Opinion about what to do about this varied. 2 thugs tried to cover their unholstered wands with their hands. One simply squeaked in embarrassment and apparated away with a pop. 3 more continued firing. This time the curses were dark and ranged between cutting curses, blood-boiling curses, and a blindness curse that was either a displaced modesty attempt or tactical move to blind an enemy. No one will really be able to tell, as a red-headed, balding, and distinctly pot-bellied wizard charged nobly between, catching the curses on the tip of his wand and flashing them back at the charging trio like a dueling master. The figure came with his own voice, showing the same amplification as Narcissa, so the whole square could hear the exchange. Fear not, my secret darling. No one molests the secret love of Arthur Weasley and lives to run away. The seeming Arthur Weasley said, as the probably Narcissa looked up in adoration, having palmed her dropped wand from the ground and gushed back. My hero, so mighty is your wand, Narcissa said, rising to bat away curses and jinxes from the charging naked thugs. There were rather more spells arcing out at the charging naked perverts than just Narcissa Malfoy, who draped herself all over the pot, bellied Arthur Weasley, as he did his best attempt to hold her like a romantic hero, as the 2 of them deflected spells that could reasonably be expected to cripple or kill anyone they hit. It turns out, 6 naked perverts attacking a pure-blood lady in the street is enough to draw supporting fire from the average shopping crowd in Diagon Alley, especially with a bit of high scandal playing out in public as extra spice. Oh, Arthur, you didn't even hesitate to come save me, even with me married to your arch-enemy Lucius Malfoy. Narcissa gushed as she caught a bone-breaking curse aimed at Arthur's neck, whipped it around her head, and launched it below the enemy's shield into his vulnerable ankle. How could I, my darling Narcissa, when you conceived our child Draco and chose to hide him under your husband's nose and name as heir Malfoy rather than risk my marriage to Marley, how could I not defend you? Arthur Weasley declared passionately, letting a cutting curse slice open his shoulder, so he could launch a Petrificus Totalis back down the same path to take another enemy out of the mix. In seconds, all the remaining attackers were downed, stunned, petrified, or in one case, now a fish very much in need of water. At that point, 4 auras, Dawlish, and 3 of his fellow auras of Cash modified allegiance descended. All right, you 2, you are under arrest. I don't know what kind of game you are playing, but it ends now. Dawlish drew his wand and shouted, Finite Incantum. From an aura of his power, it should have blasted all illusions and protections away. Instead, it showered the couple with rose petals and began to play ballroom dance music. Dawlish swore, turned to his fellow auras and demanded, Get them, stop them. Oh, Arthur, this is so much more romantic than the utility closet at the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. Dance with me. Narcissa said, and Arthur took Narcissa in his arms and began to dance. One aura drew his wand and chanted, Stupefy, which should have launched a powerful stunner, but instead only produced a little flying cherub with a cute bow and heart arrow who circled the pair of dancers, shooting little love arrows into them. The last 2 auras were done playing nice, and shot Reducto and Incideo, which would have either blown them into Kibble bits or lit them on fire. As a result, the wands they actually held caused them to instead grab each other and begin to dance alongside the pair of star-crossed lovers. Lucius Malfoy fought his way through the crowd, banishing his own illusion to confront his wayward wife. Weasley, you blood traitor scum, get your hands off my wife, Lucius roared. My husband, screamed Narcissa. Top of the morning, Lucius, how's my son and your heir Draco? Arthur offered cheerfully. Avada Kedavra, screamed Lucius, and only a diving cherub intercepting the beam and detonating it saved the Weasleys from being short 1 ginger. Now, none of that. Aura Dawlish roared, wrestling Lucius Malfoy for his wand. Dawlish may be corrupt to the point of turning a blind eye on certain, quite understandable if unsavory abuses and indulgences, but he was a Merlin-be-damned aura. No one used an unforgivable in front of him and 100 witnesses. Oh, Arthur, if this is our last time, Take me away and stir my cauldron one more time with your Weasley wand. Give me another child this time, a ginger, Narcissa shouted, causing the crowd to roar in outrage, scandal, or appreciation. He took her hand, and they apparated out, leaving 4 wands to fall to the ground, the ones taken earlier from the Auras who had entered the fray with Weasley joke wands in their holsters. Harry watched the unfolding scene with shock. He finally muttered, "What have we done?" Neville responded, "You unleashed the Weasleys of war." Millicent was only now allowing herself to blink. Even going blind was a small price to pay for a perfect memory of this scene. "Favorite Gryffindors ever," Millicent said, gripping Harry's hand tightly. "Draco is going to lose his mind if the rumor that he's Arthur Weasley's bastard gets out. Every other sentence he says is, 'My father this or that.'" Hermione said fearfully. Harry smiled, aware that maybe they went a bit too far, but then again, no one was hurt. He put his best face on the matter. "Look, nobody got hurt, assuming they got that fish into some water or transformed him back. It's not like anyone takes this blood purity stuff that seriously," Harry said. Neville grabbed him by the shoulder and stopped him. Harry realized that Neville, Millicent, and Hermione were all glaring at him. "You don't think anyone is going to take this bit of street theater seriously, do you?" Harry said. Millicent quoted, "The highest art is to bear a man's shame before the world, that 10,000 knives be drawn against him to strike at the weakness you have shown, that as he dies under 1,000 knives, he will never know the one never drawn has slain him." Harry shuddered. "What raging sociopath said that?" Neville shrugged. "Salazar Slytherin. Merlin's beard, Harry. Even I know that one. It's on the plinth of his statue in the library." Harry nodded. "Right, I got as far as Helga Hufflepuff's. There is no task that cannot be solved if all stout hearts stand together and give their all to the doing. I mean, I figured I found the one I liked. I didn't really know what the other ones say." Hermione said Godric Gryffindor's reads, "Loose not the Weasleys of war lest the whole of the world burn." Neville looked at her in shock. "It does not," she shrugged. "It should." They were finally at Flourish and Blotz. There was another crowd inside. Some wizard with improbably perfect golden ringlets, tights that seemed more painted on than the most shameless muggle yoga pants, and poofy sleeves that seemed to have gone missing from Lord Byron's wardrobe, was holding court, surrounded by what seemed like half the Hogwarts mothers and at least 2 photographers. Hermione sighed. "Let's just get our school supplies and try to escape without more drama," she asked hopefully. "More," said Fred. "Drama," said George. "As we are summoned," intoned Fred seriously. "So do we appear," said George with a dramatic bow. Hermione punched one of them in the arm. He grinned. Millicent gave the other a surprise hug. He also grinned. They entered the bookstore together. Harry smiled. They were finally there to get their books. What is the worst that could happen? 17. Chapter 17, Drake. Who is the pants in the purple tights? And why isn't he arrested for wearing tights without underwear in a store full of children buying school books? Sneered Hermione. Gilderoy Lockhart. Muttered Fred darkly. Mom loves him. George sneered darkly, pointing with his chin to where Molly Weasley had a stack of 7 books in flamboyant colors with gold lettering standing in line to be signed by said purple pants. There were dozens of middle-aged witches practically drooling, but more disturbingly, so were a number of school-aged witches. The twins' baby sister Ginevra Weasley seemingly among them. Millicent blinked, then blurted out, "Hang on, I've got some of his books on my purchase list. 7 of them for defense against the dark arts." Millicent said, something between shock and horror peeking through her Slytherin and noble reserve. Gilderoy Lockhart, much like the dreaded Weasley twins, was easily summoned by his mention. Looking over from his book signing with his publicist and photographer, he noted Harry Potter, the boy who lived with his very photogenic scar. Striding over to Harry with a smile whose brightness argued it could not be entirely non-magical, Gilderoy proved his startling good looks were matched by a tenor that belonged on the stage, as it was very clearly professionally trained. How fortunate it is that Harry Potter, the boy who lived, came today to get his school books. When he came to get his 7 books on defense against the dark arts by myself, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin 3rd Class, 5 times winner of Witch's Weekly Best Smile, he had no idea he wouldn't just be receiving my award-winning wisdom, but indeed my matchless personal instruction. Gilderoy grabbed Harry and tried to drag him to his staff photographer. Stick with me, boy. Together we are worth page one, he whispered softly. Harry turned the grabbing hand and bent the wrist back in a chicken wing. This forced Lockhart to bend backwards or break his wrist. Millicent wordlessly grabbed the opposite wrist to do the same while kicking the back of Lockhart's knees to leave him bent backwards painfully over his knees, spread wide in faint hope of balance so he didn't fall and dislocate knees and wrists both. Hermione knelt in front of the pinned Lockhart and quietly tucked her Walther PPK into the rather grossly portrayed junk in the man's too tight tights and whispered, "This is a Walther PPK, 380 ACP, a Muggle firearm. If I pull the trigger and you are wearing Madame Malkin's brand name robes of enchanted bulletproof acromantual silk, it will feel like you have been kicked in the balls by an angry centaur. If you are wearing cheap knockoffs, the bullet will explode your wizard bits into a spray of goo that will coat everyone standing behind you. If you put your creepy pervert fingers on any underage wizard or witch, we will find out which type you are wearing. Understand? Please nod if you do," said Hermione softly. Gilderoy Lockhart nodded fearfully, his makeup beginning to soften as he began to sweat noticeably. Harry and Millicent dragged him roughly upright and dusted him off. Harry said theatrically, "Sorry about that, sir. I live at Gringotts, not used to people taller than me grabbing me at random. Made me a bit jumpy," Harry said loudly for the gathered crowd. Gilderoy was nearly invincible in his self-assurance, so turned to the crowd and said smoothly, "That is just a sample of the skills your children will be learning from me at Hogwarts this year, as I accept the position of defense against the dark arts instruction at Dumbledore's repeated and urgent pleas." Lockhart said, as if this was a planned demonstration, not his utter collapse to a group of surprised second years. Neville caused Lockhart to jump a little in surprise, as he whispered just loud enough for Lockhart to hear, "Blimey, Hermione, are you sure you are the only one of us who hasn't killed anyone? I swear you are still scariest." The whimper from their future Dada instructor went unheard by most in the crowd. Draco Malfoy was in the crowd with his mother Narcissa, getting their books, and sneering at the crowd of desperate middle-aged witches trying to suck in their stomachs or push out their chests to look more attractive for the pretty boy wizard posing at the book signing. It was important to look good, but it was gauche and new money to get caught trying to look good. If you have to try, you must not be really pureblood. Breeding was everything after all. He noted Mrs. Weasley was in the crowd. What a shame to purebloods that whole family was. Their blood was of the sacred 28, yet they dressed and acted like the lowest Muggle-born. He would die of shame if he had any of their blood. Just then Lucius Malfoy burst in, looking angry and most alarmingly with his hair and clothes in disarray. He had seen father poisoned, bleeding, and even cursed, but he had never seen wild hair or a dislodged and off-center cravat. Draco froze. Lucius Malfoy for once ignored Draco, his eyes fixing on a balding pot-bellied, harried-looking red-headed man with a heavy cauldron filled with books for a rather improbable number of children. Lucius snarled at him. "Arthur Weasley, face me now." Lucius snarled, his voice low and threatening, his wand in hand. Arthur, in some confusion as he had been buying a wand for Ginny and then to the bookstore while the twins were conducting their street theater, as Arthur and Narcissa said exactly the wrong thing. "Top of the morning, Lucius. I trust Draco is well," Arthur offered cheerfully. In a moment of incandescent rage, Lucius Malfoy could only see the vision of this untidy, out of shape, poor, sadly dressed, social failure and shame to the very concept of pure blood, with his hands on Lucius' own wife in full view of half of Diagon Alley. He forgot he was a political powerhouse, a financial monster, a spy master and virtual crime lord. At that moment, all he could see were Arthur Weasley's hands on his wife, and the implication of Draco's paternity. He lost it. Forgetting his wand, he lunged across the room to hammer Arthur Weasley in the face as hard as he could. Unfortunately for Lucius, all his jibes about Weasley peasant blood had some founding. While Lucius was only likely to sweat in bed or when being audited, the Weasley patriarch was as much a farmer as wizard, and his body was in a very real sense terribly earthy. Earthy in the sense of being hard as stone, with limbs that seemed capable of breaking the same. While he was well padded, there was a disturbing amount of muscle in there, and as any man with 7 children in the generally poor breeding wizarding culture, a frightening amount of passion when roused. After taking a flurry of unanswered blows from Lucius, Arthur quickly began to overpower the Malfoy lord and batter him like a gnome in a tornado. Concerned that their father would accidentally kill Lord Malfoy, who had stopped hitting back to defend his precious and delicate face, the Weasley twins dragged their father off Malfoy, while other patrons pulled Lucius from the ground. Lucius snarled at Arthur Weasley. "You keep your dirty blood traitor hands off my wife, you penniless ministry flunky, or you will find out what it means to cross a Malfoy," shouted Lucius. The flash of a camera going off only added to the drama. Narcissa, who had been rushing to her husband's side, was shocked quite horribly by the accusation, seemingly out of nowhere, and shouted without thinking. "Lucius, what are you talking about?" Narcissa said, only to flinch in horror as Lucius turned and pointed a trembling finger at her. "Enough. We return to Malfoy Manor to administer an inheritance test for Draco. My solicitor will be in attendance." Lucius Malfoy said, with enough malice to corrode anything less than goblin silver or a reporter's instincts. A second flash lit the room as the happy reporter grabbed a second epic photo. As Lucius stooped to grab his wand and cane from the floor, almost no one noticed that he slipped a black diary from his coat and stuffed it into the cauldron full of books for Ginny Weasley that Arthur had been carrying at the beginning of the fight. As Draco and Narcissa gathered tearfully around an angered and embarrassed Lucius, desperate to get outside the store's wards to apparate home, Fred and George nodded to the book, and then to each other. Fred stalked behind Draco as if headed to another section of the store, as George grabbed the book and shot it like a fanged frisbee towards his twin, who casually redirected it with a quiet mutter and wand gesture to settle neatly into Draco Malfoy's book bag. The Malfoys exited without paying, but the owner of Flourish and Blatz was not worried. Malfoys paid their debts, but they were as likely to slaughter lowborns as bribe them if they were angry or embarrassed. Lucius Malfoy looked both. Harry looked at the chaotic scene and grinned. While it looked like this year's defense against the dark arts was going to be a waste of time, at least the ride to Hogwarts should be fun if everyone was gossiping about this. Millicent alone looked horrified. "I think we made a mistake," she said quietly. Neville was letting a soft smile of enjoyment have its moment upon his face, unhindered by regret or thoughts of consequence. "Relax, Millie. Draco spreads malicious rumors about all of us all the time. No one is going to get dead or pregnant if he gets to experience it himself for a change," Neville said. It must be noted by history that the future Lord Neville Longbottom never took divination, as the very cursory entrance test revealed he had no ability at precognition whatsoever. This is corroborated by exactly how wrong this statement was. School supplies, with a side order of vendetta. Act 2. No one had spoken at Malfoy Manor since Draco's magical genealogy was properly confirmed by the Malfoy solicitor, and Draco's position as heir Malfoy was indeed confirmed. Narcissa had nearly severed Lucius Malfoy's left arm with a cutting curse, and withered one of his legs to a mummified husk in the brutal fight which followed that confirmation. The most brutal part of the fight that saw his mother's face burned and his father's body broken was the long list of infidelities of Lucius Malfoy that Narcissa listed, all of whom most startlingly were also wizards. It turns out the reason that Malfoy had no siblings had less to do with Narcissa's fertility and more to do with Lucius' preference for riding broom over stirring cauldron. Another fact young Draco could have lived a long and happy life without ever knowing. He sneered at his friend Blaise Zabini for his mother's proclivity for marrying, and then murdering rich and foolish wizards, Theo not for his father's murder of his mother, or Marcus Flint's secret squib mother, kept as little better than slave by his abusive father. Their family shames were delicious gossip from his ivory tower of the perfect pureblood family. Now he had secrets, shames, a family that was the subject of gossip by his social inferiors, and worse, by his peers. Draco was for the first time quietly terrified to return to school, but more terrified to remain home. He poured his thoughts into the diary, because for once he dared not talk to Pansy, dear, devoted, and honestly annoying Pansy. There was no sense talking to Crabbe or Goyle. They were more or less bludgers with feet and wands. You pointed them at things. You didn't discuss your thoughts, dreams, and fears with them. Why can't it be like it was? Why can't it be like it used to be, where everyone simply accepted that I was the pure-blooded natural leader of Slytherin House, and that everyone else should simply accept their place if I thought they were worthy of being offered one? Draco wrote, only to see his words fade and ink rise to the surface in a written reply. Because they do not fear you. Mudbloods are corrupt by nature, muggles in all but name, with no understanding of the traditions and order of pure-blood society. Muggle-born are worse. They think muggles are real people, not herd animals we were raised by magic to rule. Draco looked at the diary in shock. It heard, it answered. Even more, it understood. It understood the things he believed but never dared put into words. I am Draco Malfoy, heir to the ancient and noble House Malfoy. Who are you? The ink disappeared, then rose again in answer. I am Tom Marvolo Riddle. In my youth I was Slytherin prefect, then head boy. I saw what changes needed to happen, but feared I would not have time to complete them, so I poured my heart and soul into this diary, because when I came to Hogwarts I was chosen for a special destiny, a destiny I can pass to you. The book said, and as Draco read Special Destiny, a shiver ran through his body, a cold, dark feeling of dread like when his father taught him the forbidden and dark curses that could not easily be healed by even a skilled medmage. Power. This book offered power others did not dare to take up because they feared its darkness. What special destiny? Draco asked. I was the heir of Slytherin. I passed the tests to enter and master his chamber within Hogwarts. I learned the secrets of the greatest of the Founding Four and mastered his secret tongue. The diary offered. Draco had watched as first one Hufflepuff flaunted his Parseltongue ability in the House of the Scraps and Discards, then somehow gave it to the Longbottom blood traitor, the Bulstrode half-blood, and worst of all, the Granger Muggleborn, while he, Draco Malfoy of untainted blood and Slytherin for centuries, could only grind his teeth in jealousy. Can you make me heir of Slytherin as well? Draco begged. The book took time before it answered. You will have to swear oaths to me and bind your power to mine. Then I can share the Chamber of Secrets with you and teach you to command its dread guardian. I warn you, it will require sacrifices. Our enemies must be taught to fear you, or you will never be able to lead the people back to greatness. The book asked. Draco balked. He couldn't. To bind his soul to a dark object, to enter into a pact that compromised his will, his mind, and his magic. That called for a level of trust and submission he had only ever offered to his father, a father that had proven willing to throw him away at the simple word of a Weasley. Number Draco could not trust anyone like that again. He closed the book. He just couldn't. The day to board the Hogwarts Express came, and it was only half raining, which was London fine. Platform 9-3 was going to be busy, as everyone had descended fashionably late. Draco had been dropped by his father, who had left when the whispers and laughter began to make him strain the fingers of his black gloves on his cane in quiet rage. Draco was moving towards his first-year Slytherin cohorts, who had been waiting for Draco to cross to the wizard's side. Just then, Marcus Flint, a half-healed black eye, swollen lip and limp, showing that his father had given him the usual rousing Flint family send-off, was looking for someone to vent his spleen upon. Normally, Flint focused his rage upon unsorted first years, as they were the safest targets with no built-in defensive network yet, and not enough personal power to worry about. This year, he saw a more tempting target. Draco. Ah, yes. If you want Nimbus 2000 for your team, you must take Draco as your seeker, had been the offer from Draco's famous, I'll tell my father about this, Lucius Malfoy. Except he had heard 3 different rumors and seen a series of daily prophet stories, with pictures alleging that Draco, I'll tell my father about this. Malfoy may have to owl the missus of Muggle artifacts offers Arthur Weasley to tell his true father about this. Marcus didn't believe it. They were all bloody gingers, weren't they? But Merlin's left droopy nut. The slander was bloody awesome. He had been forced to swallow Draco as seeker for the brooms, then watched Draco get outclassed by Gryffindor and Hufflepuff both. Honestly, they did better on slow brooms with an actual seeker than with that pants on a slow-moving pole. Maybe it was time he took out his angst on someone who truly deserved it. Cutting between Draco and his little crowd of newly second-year minions and followers, Marcus slammed a friendly hand on Draco's shoulder hard enough to make the bird-boned boy wince. If it isn't little Draco Weasley, Always thought your hair looked a bit ginger. So your mum must be a real goer to keep Arthur Weasley and your old man both on the go. I mean, Arthur's got like 7 kids, I guess counting you 8. He must really be a goer. If your mom can handle that on the side, maybe I should look her up, eh? Draco drew his wand and Flint yanked it out of his hands. Wands in public, Draco Weasley. That is 10 points from Slytherin. I'm a prefect this year, don't you know? Just because you are a bastard doesn't mean the rules don't apply to you. Flint said as he stalked towards Draco's friends. Get a move on your lot. No more scenes in front of muggles, or I will have you in Snape's office right off the train. Marcus barked, and all Draco's friends avoided eye contact and bolted through the illusionary wall to platform 9-3. Draco ran off to the boys' loo to hide his tears and rage. He had better control than that. He was a Malfoy. A Malfoy. Harry Potter must not go to Hogwarts, said Darby, as the quartet appeared not at the King's Cross train station, but at Whitehall. Mumblethumb, who had been transporting them, looked upset and snapped his fingers again, only to have Darby snap his at the same time. This time they were at the London Eye. The next, Buckingham Palace, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, Stamford Bridge Stadium, where Harry recognized the Chelsea Football Club logo. Harry Potter must not go to Hogwarts, shrieked Darby as Mumblethumb attempted to pull the younger house elf's ears off. Hermione frowned and said, Thanks, Mumblethumb, but I know how to get to King's Cross from here. Come along, Magicals. We're jogging to Earl's Court and taking the tube to King's Cross. She set off with a will, her magical frains following as Mumblethumb and Darby wrestled in a most undignified and unskilled manner. Arriving late to Platform 9, they tried the gate to Platform 9-3 and found it blocked by house elf magic. Looking at the clock, they decided to grab a cup of coffee and think about how to proceed, watching in alarm as Draco Malfoy came out of the boys' bathroom with a wet and well-scrubbed face, red eyes, and a dark look. He tried the gate and bounced. He reached for his wand and did not find it. Almost in tears, he pounded on the gate and screamed to be let in. Oh, that is not on. You don't leave Slytherins to be embarrassed in public. One face to the world. No snake stands alone. Millicent said, grabbing Noodle to wrap around her as she stalked towards Draco. Noodle's notice me not magic should be enough to keep muggles from paying too much attention to their conversation without Millicent actually having to risk punishment for casting anything. Draco Malfoy, well met. You have no doubt noticed the little issue with the platform being walled off. My Hufflepuff friends know an herb seller nearby with a flue address that can connect us with Hogsmeade to meet the train there. Millicent said in her best formal friendly Slytherin. Hufflepuffs, Hufflepuffs, Draco snarled. Next you will have me begging for scraps from Gryffindors. Draco raged, moving towards Millicent in a belligerent manner that ignored the fact that she outmassed him by a decent factor, was in amazing shape, was trained in magical and physical violence, still had her wand, and was a whole lot better at some very lethal forms of magical combat. Noodle was rather less invested in saving Draco's pride. Or life, honestly. They were his people and prey. Why everyone else overcomplicated the world was beyond him, but he was their token wise elder, guiding them through the murk of monkey overcomplications to the simplistic perfection of serpentine thought. He struck. It is a little-known fact that venomous magical snakes do not have to inject venom when they bite. They rarely bother to bite anything that isn't attacking them or about to become food, but they can simply bite them if for some reason something less immediate than agonizing death is called for. One could argue, in fact, in Dumbledore's office later it was argued, that Noodle was practicing serpentine diplomacy and de-escalation, possibly proving why snake peacekeepers never became a thing. Draco fell back whimpering, shocked out of his emotional storm by the fact of his impending and painful death. Translate for yellow-haired prey. Exactly. I am listening for editing. Noodle hissed, and everyone who was used to toning down Noodle's exact wording winced as Millicent nodded. Yellow-haired prey, you have been offered aid without any assumption of obligation or debt. You have been offered a path that avoids humiliation and punishment. You have returned that with attack. Do so again and I will inject the venom you already deserve, and you will stop being yellow-haired prey and become simply food. Rats are food, mice are food, fools are food. Try harder to be better than that, or be assured I will eat the bits of you I choose not to share with Night Pigeon. Noodle hissed. Millicent translated honestly word for word. Draco rose up, wiping the blood on his shoulder from the deep bite. I don't need your help, Draco hissed. Harry offered softly. You kind of do. We can't get past the barrier and the train is pulling out now. Either join us for a walk and a flu or call home to Daddy and tell him you missed the train. Merlin's beard, what else can you do? Steal Weasley's flying car and fly to Scotland. Harry laughed. Draco snarled. Weasley, and bolted from the train station. Neville spoke in a tone of quiet horror. You don't think he's going to? Hermione kicked Harry in the bum fairly hard. Of course he's going to. Harry, you know better than to suggest a regrettable life choice to a testosterone-poisoned teenage boy. As a species, surviving male teenage stupidity is the critical natural selection filter. Harry smiled. Well, not our problem. Off to Neville's favorite herb shop to borrow their flu network. We can be at Hogsmeade before the train, and then owl our heads of house an advisory before the train delivers notice we didn't make it. Keeps us away from drama queens and house elves altogether. They were indeed sitting in the great hall laughing with their friend, and awaiting their sorting, when Professor Snape dragged a badly bleeding Draco Malfoy through the hall and off to the Mediwitch's tender care. They could only overhear a few choice words from the Slytherin house leader as he dragged young Draco past. Stole a flying car. Seen by 7 muggles. Badly damaged a valuable Whomping Willow and lost the stolen car in the Forbidden Forest. Detention, young Malfoy, is only the beginning. Was all they heard as the bleeding and weeping boy was dragged through the great hall towards the infirmary. The hall erupted in a whole new level of rumor, and the name Draco and Weasley was suddenly whispered on the winds from every table. Bugger, said Harry softly to his friends. He turned to the Slytherin table and mouthed a quiet sorry. To Millicent, who rolled her eyes at him. Look, maybe I was wrong about this not being a big deal. Said Harry. Hermione kicked him again under the table, and this time he didn't protest. You think? She asked rhetorically. They all eyed the Slytherin table, where a lot of faces bore smiles of pure malice that argued a great many people who had submitted to Draco's abuse when he held the social power were just waiting to show him how it felt to be weak enough to have to grin and bear it. That night, Draco opened his diary and, with tears blending with the ink, swore his life, soul, and magic to the diary in return for the knowledge to open the Chamber of Secrets and make everyone in Hogwarts fear the new heir of Slytherin, Draco Malfoy. 18. Chapter 18, Badgers and Bedrooms. Neville Longbottom found himself before Professor Dumbledore facing possible expulsion, an angry array of Hufflepuff parents behind him. Dumbledore's eyes were very serious as he insisted, his left hand holding the wand he had just disarmed a very aggravated Augusta Longbottom from wielding against him. This is not a matter that I can leave to my heads of house. I have seen in the Daily Prophet a reliable rumor that one of our male students has been sleeping in the girls' dormitory with multiple girls. This is something that has not been seen since the time of Headmaster Dippet, who erred in allowing Sirius Black off with only probation. Since he is now in Azkaban for betrayal and murder, clearly that act of tolerance was a mistake. Dumbledore rumbled. Here now, I was at Hogwarts back then, and Sirius was a 6th-year caught with a pair of 7-year girls in the act. What you are trying to punish young Neville for is nothing like that at all, shouted Emil Wiltshire, father of one of the girls in question. Professor Sprout had her hands on her hips and was visibly fighting with the obedience oath Hogwarts used to keep staff from going against the headmaster's orders when he chose to invoke its power. Millicent casually slipped from the background crowd she had no place in and quietly placed her hand on Professor Sprout's back and whispered Issa to still the powerful obedience oath into temporary slumber. That is just about enough, Albus. I will not have a sweet boy like Neville compared to those lunatic marauders you chose to tolerate and empower back then. Oh yes, Albus, you weren't subtle. Just because we could not argue does not mean we could not see. Sirius Black was an ill-disciplined rogue, the bad seed of a worse tree, and you empowered his very worst behaviors. Neville is a sweet boy who did what any Hufflepuff should be expected to do and aided his housemates in distress. I was told of it and convinced him to continue. Albus Dumbledore frowned. Her oath should have kept her silent. He felt the bond between them and attempted to exert his will along it, but the bond was oddly unresponsive. Not severed, just still, as if time had stepped around it and passed for the rest of the world and left the bond aside as it passed. Harry needed to be properly guided. Rumors of his dark practices already made Dumbledore fear Harry was headed down the dark path. Neville had already branded himself an evil influence and needed to be cut away. The young Granger girl had proven herself another evil influence, possibly some sort of radicalized Muggle political with no respect for the traditions of the world she was stepping into. He had left her removal to Lucius Malfoy and his not-so-clever contacts in the underage magic authority and auras of negotiable allegiance, only to have them actually fail. Fail against a Muggle girl with no backing or support. If his enemies could not handle a Muggle-born child, of course it fell to Dumbledore to handle the pureblood nobles with actual support. Neville was caught sleeping with no less than 5 Hufflepuff girls, Professor Sprout. Not even Sirius was that disgraceful. Albus said primly. He was a badger, Albus. I had one crying, homesick girl in the common room, and the next thing you know, half the first years were sobbing and demanding to go home. They were alone and afraid in a strange place, and Lord Longbottom chose that moment to have a breakthrough in his animagus studies and found the spirit of Hufflepuff and turned into a badger. Professor Sprout clasped her hands and beamed as she looked at the memory of that evening. Neville had transformed into the largest badger she had ever seen, but he was a very Neville sort of badger, and before she could react at all, the original crying girl hand buried herself into his fur, tears, snot and all, and clung to him like a baby lemur. In seconds he had gathered into his paws all the weeping Hufflepuff girls, and in a great, deeply sticky mess of soft fur and sobs, they cried themselves to sleep. When the time came to wake them to go to their rooms, they refused to go without Neville. For the first 2 nights, Neville had slept with the first-year girls because they were homesick. Then the next night, he had slept with the second-year girls because he was fluffy, and they never had the chance when they were first years. This was enough to make Neville feel guilty, and thus Neville spent another night with the Hufflepuff second-year girls. Dumbledore tried again. He is an unregistered animagus. That is a crime. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, shouted Minerva McGonagall. Being deputy headmistress, she was less bound by oath than full subordinates, and about done listening to Dumbledore go after the sweet 12-year-old Longbottom boy as if he was a late-teen degenerate like his precious marauders. You know very well that animagi are required to submit their form to the Ministry of Magic upon the completion of their newts or end of their education. You personally advised me not to register my own form until I had completed my post-newt transfiguration mastery as your apprentice to avoid any meddling from the ministry. Minerva objected firmly. Badgers are dangerous animals that should not be allowed around children. Dumbledore said, flailing now for his disciplinary excuse. The booming of a battle staff hitting the ground shocked the room as Mad Eye Moody glared at Dumbledore. Choose your next words carefully, Dumbledore. I may have lost a leg against Voldemort, but he left blood on the ground too. I'm a proud Hufflepuff, and while the lore of other houses is full of hippogriff shit about supremacy of their house and their founder, ours is full of stories of Helga Hufflepuff bringing actual badgers into her house to live among her students. For 100 years, this was the custom after her passing. We are the House of Badgers, and the day you attempt to remove a student from Hufflepuff for being a badger is the day you see how sharp are our claws. Mad Eye said, stumping to stand beside Professor Sprout, noting that several Hufflepuff parents were also arraying behind the pair, hands on wands, and worst of all, Harry, Hermione, and somehow the damned Slytherin chit Bulstrode had snuck in and was standing beside Neville ready to draw wands. Dumbledore was forced to relent. It sets a bad tone for a male student to be sleeping with female students, underage female students. Dumbledore said, a last attempt at defiance. A bunch of homesick girls were crying and needed a stuffed animal to hug to feel better. Neville just gave them one that actually cared and hugged back. If you want to raise this as a morality breach, understand my daughter Susan was one of the second-year girls he slept with on the second night, and I have seen her memories in my pensive. Should you press this as a morality matter, I will be forced as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement to treat this as a deliberate character assassination and abuse of position to defame a lord of house by another lord of house, and demand your trial before the Wittergamot. Amelia Bones said softly, moving to stand beside Mad Eye Moody. Augusta Longbottom snarled, standing beside her Neville. If you think the light faction will come like you well-trained dogs to your defense in the Wittergamot, you may see how many of them stand with House Longbottom, and how many of them stand with Hufflepuff. Augusta threw the gauntlet down, with pride in no way affected by her beginning this conversation being disarmed. Millicent Bulstrode offered some speculation, loudly enough to be heard. As Lady Selwyn, I would be forced to instruct my steward, that would be my uncle, Lord Bulstrode, to stand with House Longbottom. I can't imagine many of the dark faction would mind taking advantage of a split in the light faction to force a vote of no confidence in Albus Dumbledore when he has lost support of his own followers. Can't say who the new Supreme Mugwump would be, but it wouldn't be a friend, that is for sure. Millicent mused thoughtfully, shaking her head in mock sadness. Albus Dumbledore smiled his best kindly grandfatherly smile and chuckled softly. Perhaps it comes from never having been a parent myself. I failed to look at this from the point of view of the children involved. Indeed, given the age and experience of a wizard who has seen so many abuses over the years, it is possible I overreacted and saw a threat to our children I could not ignore, where in fact no such threat exists. Nodding as if he had seen the wisdom of their words, not the defeat of his plans, Dumbledore spoke softly. It seems I have been mistaken and done some fine young people a very grave disservice. Still, the matter with the Daily Prophet will have to be addressed. The reputation of the school must be protected after all. Dumbledore said, abandoning his plan, but leaving others to do clean-up. Emil Wiltshire chuckled and pulled out a photo. Send this to the Prophet. My daughter sent me a copy when she owled about her first week. If anyone has a problem after that, you know it's politics, not reason. The photo was passed to a group of mothers, who all gave a collective, "Oh." Minerva McGonagall snagged the photo before it could reach Dumbledore, and saw a strange nest, formed with a tangle of pajama-clad arms and legs, flung haphazardly about like some sort of flannel squid around a black and white body of a sleeping badger, with 4 little faces burrowed into his fur, 8 little fists gripped tight in his fur. Is Mr. Longbottom really that soft? McGonagall wondered, not thinking anything as tough as a badger ought to be the degree of soft and plushy that she seemed to be seeing. Millicent and Granger grabbed one of Neville's shoulders and cooed in stereo. So fluffy! Neville hunched down in his chair and tried to disappear, rather unsuccessfully. Augusta Longbottom had an unreadable expression on her face, but Harry was openly snickering at his friend's new existence as Hogwarts' designated plushie. As the group filed down the stairs to the great hall for a long-delayed lunch, Neville sought to deflect the attention from his badger animagus to Harry. "So, mate, any progress in your own?" Neville asked. Harry shrugged. "I know it's a snake, but also not a snake. It's like I can see its shadow, but there isn't enough of me to fill it yet. I can fill most of it, but something is missing. It is part of who I need to be, but I'm not there yet. Dollar being a snake is complicated. If it was simple, any monkey could do it. I think it is well that you are holding out until you are less ignorant and have more of the monkey beaten out of you. You would make an embarrassing snakelet right now. I would not want to be seen with you." Noodle offered in what to him was support. "I can't believe we have to wait to Easter to even do our potions," huffed Hermione. Harry shrugged. "Not my fault you chose to get born under more complicated stars," he supplied unhelpfully. "Still, we can practice doing potions together with our gifts to make yours more potent than ours was. Should make it a little easier." Millicent looked excited. "Neville and I can do things with potions you wouldn't believe. His plant magic, my water magic, his ability to make processes happen when he wills it, and mine to make them stop allow us to take chances normal potions would explode if you tried." Hermione shrugged. "Fire does what I tell it to. I isn't that I just give heat to things, I can take it. I can keep a temperature steady or even keep different parts of the potion at different temperatures. It's more an art than any sort of a magical science, so we would have to experiment." Harry shook his head. "Look, air is my thing. About all I can do is control the fumes. I mean, I can condense stuff out of the air for extractions. And yeah, I can brew some really toxic stuff and not have to worry about breathing it. but I'm not super useful potions-wise. All three turned to Harry and pointed. Clean up, three yelled in stereo, and one swore in counterpoint. Inside Dumbledore's office, Albus Dumbledore looked at Alistair Moody of his Order of the Phoenix, Senior Field Auror, and Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE. I know you did what you felt was right based on the facts of the case, but you understand this was just an excuse to remove a dangerous influence on the boy who lived. You know the prophesy, you know the stakes. Voldemort will return, and if the boy who lived is not willing to do his part, we all may fall. Amelia Bones snickered. The Longbottom boy, what's he going to lead Potter into? Gardening, group hugs. The boy may never be the hero Augusta wants, but if he has an evil bone in his body, it must be shrapnel. Dumbledore leaned forward and put his legitimacy behind his words to hammer them into the minds of his listeners, forcing them to give them the weight he knew they needed. He killed two people. He killed his own parents. He takes part in forbidden rituals hidden in parts of the forest denied to me. Dumbledore said, his voice ringing with the truth of it. Amelia felt the words hammer home. While head of the DMLE, she had come up through administration, not aura, and lacked the mind defense training. For a second the words looked like they would take root, but Alistair slammed down his staff again, a blast of magic snapping Dumbledore's legitimacy. He ended their pain, you Merlin be damned coward. I asked you, I begged you, 12 years ago to let me end it for them. They only stopped screaming when the Mediwitches paralyzed their vocal cords. You said we couldn't afford another death in the Order. For morale, for the greater good, sacrifices had to be made. I swore your damned oath and couldn't disobey you. Well, he did not. He did what you forbade me to. Moody paused for a second before ushering his half-stupefied boss Amelia Bones to the door of Dumbledore's office. Funny thing about those forbidden rituals. You are awfully keen on stopping those forbidden rituals, even though they were part of wizarding culture before your precious Wizigamot, or even Hogwarts was. Yet you bound us all in forbidden rituals, in a forbidden armed order of the Phoenix that subverts sworn agents of legitimate government and law enforcement to do your private will. Examining the choices of young Neville Longbottom and Albus Bloody Dumbledore, I deeply regret which one I swore to. Moody said as he stomped out of Albus Dumbledore's office. That was bad. Of his direct action agents, very few survived the war. Alistair Moody was the single most dangerous of his still living followers. Still, he brushed off Alistair's criticisms of his methods. Albus was the champion of light. Only he understood the needs of the greater good. Only he could be trusted to make the hard choices. Only one more sacrifice to make, and whatever it cost to see the boy who lived sacrifice himself to save the world, then Dumbledore could at last rest. 19. Chapter 19, Classes and Conflict. Defense against the dark arts is one definition of Dada. Daft actor doing abysmally is the one that was written clearly on all the Hogwarts students' timetables, and for once Fred and George Weasley swore their innocence and admiration. For once, Hermione was guilty. Hermione's reaction to Dada class being turned into musical theatre, where Gilderoy Lockhart's own portraits formed the chorus, was beyond negative. School was a church to Hermione, a shrine to learning, and what was practiced there was a sacrament and worship. Now the Purple Pants was turning it into an utterly inappropriate grooming exercise for Gilderoy Lockhart to whip his underage female fans into a worshipful frenzy, while filling their heads with nonsense that would do nothing but get you killed in a confrontation with the vampire, werewolf, banshee, or whatever creature the current lie was about. Noodle had identified the low-level charm being put off by Lockhart as being potion-based, similar to the Immortentia or love potion, only greatly weakened by its use as a perfume. It was enough to induce fascination and to greatly enhance any natural attraction that may be present or may be induced situationally, but not enough to cross the detection threshold hours later if a competent Mediwitch were to use a diagnostic to check for its presence. Worse, repeated exposures would layer enough suggestions that the target would grow to accept the thoughts and urges as their own. Grooming. Granted, she had no evidence he was doing anything with her second-year classes, but she had no one she knew enough to get information from in the higher classes. No one put that much effort into magical seduction if they were not in fact a predator. Millicent and Neville shrugged it off. After all, since the most powerful light wizard in existence hired the git, he must clearly know of and tolerate the abuse. Neville chose to believe that meant Dumbledore wouldn't let anything truly objectionable happen. Millicent patted his hand in a way that said, "You are very sweet and very dim, and I will take care of the things you don't need to know about," because Slytherin could be supportive and murderous in the same gesture. Their communication economy was fairly impressive to Hermione. Harry favored confronting him directly. They had killed the last Dada professor and gotten away with it, so clearly it wasn't off the table. Hermione had been dealing with Auror Dawlish and his cronies all year, and rather suspected that Gilderoy Lockhart was some form of trap. They could not act against him directly, but they could and should force him to act directly instead, and expose him as a fraud and pervert. Today's Dada class was promising to be less boring, as Lockhart insisted everyone draw their wands and be prepared to defend themselves. The Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students drew their wands and prepared for some sort of menace, but Ravenclaw Marietta Edgecombe burst out laughing and identified the caged creatures on Lockhart's desk. 5 points Ravenclaw. Yes, indeed, these are freshly caught Cornish pixies, and they have been devenomed this morning through a potion from our dear Professor Snape, so do not fear for your lives. The pixie is one of a number of magical swarming pests, many of which can kill you quite swiftly if you lack the trained reflexes of an Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and Dark Defense League Knight, honorary like myself," said Lockhart, preening visibly, his ranked portraits leading the applause of the female half of the class to his posturing. Now, I am not the only celebrity in this class. We are graced with Harry Potter, the boy who lived, and as anyone can tell you, the more books written about you, the more important and powerful you must be, and Harry has even more books written about him than I do," Gilderoy said lightly. Gilderoy smiled cruelly, ready to complete his pre-planned dominance play to establish himself as the one true celebrity in Hogwarts. "For that reason, when I release the pixies, I will let the class see what they can do on their own, then let Mr. Potter finish up the rest if they prove too much for you," Lockhart said, opening the cage and stepping back through the door to his teacher's prep room to watch the festivities in peace, ready to step in once the boy had been properly humiliated. The pixies charged everywhere, grabbing ink pots and hurling them at students, stealing wands and grabbing long hair to pull witches forward by, or pulling male students' robes over their heads to blind and muffle them. Neville and Hermione were stunning any that came at them, but Hermione turned and told Harry, "Look, he's not going to do anything until you deal with these little idiots. If Neville and I do something beyond parting the Arcashnal one, we are going to damage them. Can't you do a little air stuff?" Hermione made a little sweeping motion, indicating Harry should clean up the mess. Harry on the whole didn't like to use his wind magic, as it seemed rather happier to unleash storms of wind and lightning to devastate whole city blocks than to do casual dusting of his dorm room, but he had been practicing. With a sigh, he raised his wand and made a circular motion, chanting H. Verfilvinder, and a whirlwind was born from his wand tip. With a growing smile, he directed his whirlwind to dance around the room and collect pixies. Soon, the tornado was shot with gaping mouths, wide eyes, and flailing hands as little blue-winged pixies spun in the wind like they were berries in a Muggle smoothie blender. He directed the whirlwind to collect most of the pixies and shot them from the bottom of the wind into the cage where they were too dizzy and pummeled to rise. Gilderoy Lockhart's face looked like he had just bitten a birdie bart every flavored bean named Vomit, clearly unhappy with his planned chaos. He strode forth from the class and found Hermione sneering openly at him. "Not quite the result you were hoping for, Professor," Hermione said in a caricature of politeness. Gilderoy looked at her, a mop of brown curls with a small girl attached, not a hint of curve on her, nor any trace of proper aristocratic features. Plain girl. Honestly, if she was actually ugly, she would at least be interesting to look at. How dare such a plain nonentity seek to mock Gilderoy Lockhart? For a girl with neither beauty nor any trace of grace, you seem to be entirely too comfortable with letting famous wizards defend you. It won't be long until he grows up a bit and finds virtually any other girl more interesting than you. Who will defend you then?" Lockhart sneered. One pixie who had been hiding in the candelabra while the whirlwind hunted dove down at Lockhart in an attempt to grab hold of his perfect ringlets and rip off a handful. Unfortunately for the screaming Lockhart, who ducked from Hermione's drawn wand under the assumption that it was meant for him, she was actually targeting the pixie. "Incendio," she muttered, and the diving pixie burst into flames. It fell onto the ground and screamed as it rolled from side to side. Lockhart finally fumbled out his wand and cast a shaky augmenti to pour water on the pix, but the pixie continued to burn, even under the water, until it died. Hermione looked at the pixie, then poked it with her foot. Making a tusk-tusk noise, she turned to Lockhart and smiled. "I imagine I'll be fine, don't you think, sir?" Hermione said, smiling brightly. Lockhart backed away and dismissed their class. If the morning Dada class was off-putting, the afternoon class was actively disturbing. This time, Gilderoy Lockhart was facing the Slytherin/Gryffindor class, and he was simply trying to build his reputation as a dangerous wizard in their minds. The Gryffindors were not Ravenclaws to believe something just because they read it, and the Slytherin respected only power. For that reason, he had to demonstrate his power on something safe, so he didn't have to do it again when he got to actually dangerous beasts. Gilderoy began with his trademark speech about the pixies. "Yes, indeed, these are freshly caught Cornish pixies, and they have been devenomed this morning through a potion from our dear Professor Snape, so do not fear for your lives. The pixie is one of a number of magical swarming pests, many of which can kill you quite swiftly if you lack the trained reflexes of an Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and Dark Defense League Knight, honorary, like myself." This time, he wasn't planning on leaving it to the students, but to use the spell he had learned from the actual pest exterminator he based his book on. The poor fellow got obliviated back into idiocy before Lockhart was done with him, but his own invented pixie binding spell had indeed made him locally famous and rich enough to draw Lockhart's attention. He had practiced the spell in front of the mirror 100 times, turning the boring, snarled, barely verbal grunts into a properly theatrical delivery, but the basic wand movements and words were still there. His was just a whole lot easier to appreciate. No wham-bam thank you ma'am from Gilderoy Lockhart. When he cast a spell, he wanted everyone to appreciate his sheer artistry and presence. Not like he was facing a Dementor after all. "Now I will release the pixies and demonstrate the pixie binding charm. I expect I will bag almost all of them, but there should be a few left for you students to show what you have learned from your other professor. Of course, he got killed by a first year, so he can't have actually had much to teach you," mocked Lockhart, making Draco Malfoy in the audience seethe with rage. Draco Malfoy didn't know that Voldemort was Tom Riddle, but Tom Riddle did. Hearing himself mocked like that by a patent fraud like that hit Tom in his ego, which bled through to hit Draco's already fragile ego, and set the two of them into a spiral of self-amplifying rage. Lockhart released the pixies and began gesturing theatrically and chanting like he was acting the part of Merlin in some staged Arthurian drama, not engaging in close-quarters combat with a swarm of pixies released already inside arm's reach. Malfoy had no idea if the spell would have worked. Lockhart's wand was plucked from his hand, and his nose tweaked harshly by two different pixies who proceeded to steal his cravat and blindfold him with it. Lockhart screamed and crawled beneath his desk, clearly leaving the students to their own devices. Draco Malfoy saw the little beasts take Crabbe's wand away and blind Goyle with a splash of ink to the face. Then they lifted Pansy by her hair to dangle in the air, which ought to be impossible for such small figures, but he knew they had mass-altering magic of their own. If they thought it was fun to dangle things in the air, so be it. Leviacorpus Acer, Malfoy snarled, and made a gesture similar to fly fishing as he caught half the darting pixies in his curse. This was based on the Leviacorpus jinx his uncle Severus had tried to teach him. Draco didn't used to have the raw power to make it work, but since finding Tom and the diary, dark magics came to him so much easier, and he had so much more raw power to use them with. Tom had suggested a change. Leviacorpus dangled subjects upside down from their ankles, but did no real harm. Leviacorpus Acer added a piercing element to the jink, making it a proper dark magic combat spell. A dozen Cornish pixies were caught in the whip of dark magic, and a black wire of curse magic pierced both legs between ankle and Achilles tendon and dangled them upside down like so many caught rabbits strung up for the cookpot. The little pixies whimpered in pain, and a fine rain of blood dripped down them as they twitched and fluttered helplessly. The class looked on with a mix of shock and horror, except for Millicent Bulstrode, who was busy dealing with the rest. Taking out her own wand, she raised it up and slashed it down with authority, calling out, "Haglaz!" Icy hail sprang from the ceiling and hammered the pixies to the ground. Sweeping her wand in a much tighter motion, she traced a short vertical slash less than 5 centimeters with her wand, leaving a short glowing eye hanging in mid-air as she whispered, "Issa." Down pixies were frozen but unharmed, and she simply used a muttered Akio pixies to refill the cage with the frozen pixies, leaving only Draco's hanging, bleeding, and whimpering ones. Draco looked at Millicent and sneered. Millicent looked at Draco and raised one eyebrow. Dominance attempted and ignored. If Draco thought to cow Millicent Bulstrode with a demonstration of brutality, he had been raised far more gently than a half-blooded daughter in a pure blood-dark family. Well, stuff them in, Millicent said, tired of holding the cage door open while Draco Malfoy played dominance games. Or do I need to get a Weasley like Ron over there to show you how to stick it in? Millicent said in a reference to his rumored parentage she would regret making later, but at the time she was too annoyed at his bullshit dominance games to care. Malfoy flushed red and directed the pixies into the cage as Ron Weasley set off the whole class into laughter as he defended his father's honor. It's not true. My dad never looked at another woman. He would never touch a filthy snake like Malfoy's mum, swore Ron hotly. Yeah, said Seamus Finnegan, even if she is hot enough to be a cover witch. And Stacked chimed in Dean Thomas. Why wouldn't he? Said Tracy Davis. I've seen Weasley's mother, and no offense, but Narcissa Malfoy is one of the great beauties of her generation, and Weasley's mom is just. Draco Malfoy lost it again. My mother would never let a Weasley even look at her. Daphne Greengrass chimed in, but you have to admit he would want to. Not helping Daphne, said Millicent. I'm just saying. Protested Tracy Davis. Did more than look, I heard. Said someone from the back of the Gryffindor side. Draco Malfoy was beyond all reason when he left Dada. He had told the diary that all he needed was to demonstrate his power to claim his rightful place in Slytherin as the heir of Slytherin and their rightful ruler. Tom had argued he needed to do more than talk. Hogwarts needed to be cleansed of the mudbloods and blood traitors. The halls needed to run red with blood before they could truly be clean again. Draco thought Tom wanted Draco to do what he feared to all those years ago, but dared not say it to the one voice that was still on his side. Once again, Tom was right. The time for words and pretty demonstrations was done. It was time the heir of Slytherin taught Hogwarts to fear the sound of his name and obey the whisper of his words. That night after curfew, a Ravenclaw ghost sat in her toilet and sang softly to herself. She liked night time. No pesky students in the hallways, no intruders in her toilet. She died here all those years ago, and still they wouldn't leave her alone. The door opened. A boy came in, blonde hair and very pretty, a Slytherin. You are very pretty for a boy, but you cannot be in here. This is a girl's bathroom, Myrtle said. Draco screamed and dropped the black diary in his hands. I don't know what you are screaming about. I didn't break into your toilet. I do like to sneak into the senior prefects' bathrooms when they are showering, and they do tend to scream, but this is my bathroom and you have your clothes on, Myrtle said, spinning in mid-air in unconcern. She was sensitive for a ghost, but still a ghost. Who are you? Malfoy screamed again, really not responding well to this many surprises. This is Myrtle's bathroom. Everyone knows that. I am Myrtle. You are in my bathroom, a girl's bathroom. Myrtle stressed again and tried to peek at the drop diary. Ooh, is that a diary? All your thoughts and fears poured into it. I had one once. The only person I shared it with was Tom, but he stopped coming after I died, Myrtle said, swooping for the diary, but when she touched it, she cried out in pain and retreated in tears. Meanie, how can you hurt a poor dead girl like me? Myrtle sobbed. You aren't pretty after all. She dove into her toilet, and in her tears began to cause it to back up all over the floor. Draco picked up the precious diary before it could get wet. Holding it in his hands, he walked to the sink with the serpent taps. Closing his eyes, he tried to open himself fully to the diary to let its cold essence flow into him. He had been working on these exercises for weeks. and he was starting to black out sometimes when he did so. He would come to in a different part of the dungeon, with no memory of how he got there. But Tom seemed to tell him that was all a part of learning to tap the powers of the heir of Slytherin. He couldn't be the true heir unless he opened the chamber, and he could not open the chamber until he could speak the words. Draco was proud of his birth, proud of his pure blood, and even more proud of their allegiance to the Dark Lord who spoke Slytherin's own tongue. Now he was stuck in a school where two half-bloods, a blood traitor and a muggle-born all spoke Parseltongue, while he, the Malfoy heir, could not. The diary could change that. Tom swore if he opened himself fully enough, let the power flow into him fully enough, he too could speak it. He could take the spirit of the heir into himself and become a speaker. Like Voldemort, he could become Slytherin's heir, and the world would tremble before him. Draco felt the water from the overflowing toilet soak into his socks. Bitter tears rolled down his face as something nudged his shoe. He would not look. He would not. He was a Malfoy. Ignoring a sobbing ghost and backing up toilet, Draco Malfoy poured his heart and soul into Tom Riddle's diary and felt his mind grow blank. The expression of a fragile little boy fell from Draco Malfoy's face, and an expression Myrtle might well have recognized replaced it. The calm, confident tones of Tom Riddle sounded from the mouth of Draco Malfoy and spoke only one word. Open. Dust added a layer to the overflowing toilet water as the chamber opened for the first time in decades. With a smile, the heir of Slytherin stalked into the chamber to awaken its sleeping guardian. He had held back the last time because his soul could not bear the burden of the blood of wizarding children, even to bring forth the world they deserved, but were robbed of. This time he would not hold back his hand. This time, he would do what was necessary and cleanse Hogwarts as the first step to reshaping a pure and untainted wizarding Britain. Tom Marvolo Riddle did not know why the him who had left Hogwarts had failed to bring about this vision the first time, but this diary was his second chance, and he would fix what his original had failed to do. The Dark Lord that should have been would rise. The heir of Slytherin was reborn. 20. Chapter 20. Potions and Perverts. Noodle says Lockhart is using some form of a mortentia to fascinate all the girls, and not a few of the staff members. He's using it as a perfume, so we need to make a counter-agent. Hermione said firmly. Millicent, whose own Slytherin first-year girl Kit had a unicorn horn on a charm bracelet to casually test every glass of pumpkin juice and water she was offered for the presence of the wizard love drug, nodded firmly, but offered the caution. We don't know what version he is using. The stronger it is, the less useful the standard counter-agents are. Millicent offered, as the arms race between creepy date rape wizards and witches' defense against same had been raging since Merlin and Morgana. Neville offered quietly. You know, you were saying we should stretch ourselves, use our elemental affinities together to make something that normal magic can't do. What if we made the ultimate a Mortinia, then based our counter-agent after that? Even dispersed really widely, like a Weasley dung bomb type thing in the Great Hall, it would still be strong enough to turn Lockhart's weaker Amortinia charm into a repulsion. Harry snapped his head around and looked at Neville. Merlin's beard, that is brilliant, Neville. It's the nuclear option. While the wizard raised failed to understand the reference, Hermione did, and offered a very un-Hermione cheer. Death to perverts, we are at war. Hermione cheered, causing all the Hufflepuff table and some from the other nearby dinner tables to look over. A series of glances was exchanged between the Gryffindor Quidditch team before the Weasley twins led the three Gryffindor chasers Katie Bell, Alicia Spinnet, and Angelina Johnson came over to the Hufflepuff table with their dinner plates in hand. Did you mention, said Fred, perverts. Finished George, sliding a row of squeaking Hufflepuffs down along their own common room bench to make room with a very smooth bit of chantless levitation. Millicent rolled her eyes and pointed her fork at the ginger menaces who slid on one side of the bench while the three female Gryffindor chasers slid on the other. Or you ginger abominations, we were trying to get rid of perverts, not summon two more. Millicent offered with her best slithering glare. We are innocent as newborn, started Fred, not newborn precisely, corrected George toddlers. Offered Fred deeply disturbed but non-perverted toddlers, agreed George. Innocent as deeply disturbed but non-pervert toddlers, finished Fred piously. We're just here, said George, for introductions. Concluded Fred. Girls, Hufflepuffs, Hufflepuff girls, offered George tactfully. And Slytherin, although she only bites, offered Fred, if you ask nicely. Finished George, batting his eyelashes outrageously at Millicent, who broke into laughter behind her pumpkin juice, not at all offended by the outrageous pair. Katie Bell leaned forward. Look, we asked the Ginger Gits to introduce us, because you are all beta mad and seemed friendly. And we, at least 4 of us, are all Quidditch girls, and share the same problem even if you don't know it yet. Hermione, who had perverts on her mind at the moment, noted the gender of the last part of the remark, and did the arithmancy to see the way the ward was forming, and spoke the quiet part out loud. You have a pervert problem. She spoke firmly. Alicia shook her head and pointed to the 3 Gryffindor girls and Millicent. No, we have a pervert problem. Angelina started, waving a croissant so angrily Neville and Fred both had to dodge. It started with Quidditch practice. When we got back, our underwear would be gone. We assumed Fred and George, obviously, but they swore a magical oath they not only didn't do it, but would help find out who did. Angelina said. Started, said Harry. Sometimes the underwear got returned. Icky, said Katie Bell, driving her table knife into the actual table, drawing glares from the Hufflepuff prefects. Hermione and Millicent both pushed their food away, too nauseated to eat any more. Gross, Hermione said for both of them. Angelina was still in her rant. Now it's like we can tell someone is watching us when we shower, but the shower room is warded against scrying by Professor Babbage herself, so you know no one can be spying from outside. Harry, who was very familiar with the wards on the female areas of Hogwarts because runes were one of his magical obsessions, as is true of most goblins, spoke up next. Hang on. No man could be peeking. The wards on those buildings mean that the only man that could bypass the wards to get in the female area would be Dumbledore himself, and I am pretty sure he flies for the other team and is honestly a bit far along to fly at all. Harry offered in the bluntness of the young. Neville stared thoughtfully. I could. The 3 Gryffindor chasers looked at him and frowned. Neville held up his hands and said softly, I wouldn't. Gran would kill me, but I could do it. I'm an animagus, and in my badger form I can go into the female-only dorms. I imagine the showers are the same. Katie Bell smiled and patted his hand. We would have noticed a badger, Neville, but thanks for offering that. Not a cat is smaller, and could easily hide in a locker or under a bench. She's not the only one in this castle who doesn't smell like the skin they wear. Noodle offered, and Harry translated. Angelina looked confused. Who is not a cat? Harry shrugged. That is what Noodle calls McGonagall. I wouldn't read too much into it. I mean, he calls Ron's rat not a rat after all. Katie Bell snickered. Well, he's not much of a rat. I mean, Percy's hand-me-down robes look pretty threadbare. Scabbers is about as pathetic as a hand-me-down rat can get, but he's still a rat. Not a rat. Why does no one listen to the adults? Nestlings. None of them should be allowed out without a thinking brain reptile of their own. Noodle offered uncharitably. Hermione stroked Noodle, working some salve into his skin. You will have to forgive Noodle. He is molting, and that always makes him grumpy. Hermione said. Millicent sat back and thought. You know, when I was having problems in the Slytherin girls' dorm, I used to take Noodle with me into the showers. Nothing like a 10-foot rock viper to cut down on shower drama. If someone is sneaking in your change room or spying through cracks at you, Noodle will find out pretty quickly. The 3 Gryffindor chasers looked with pleading eyes at Harry, who was immediately trumped by a Hermione in sisterhood mode. The war on perverts is a just one. Please let Noodle assist you. Harry tossed his knife and fork onto his plate and offered weakly, Morgana's furry fundament. Evel is sleeping with whole dorm rooms of girls. Noodle is showering now with 3 different houses worth of girls. And I'm supposedly the celebrity in the group, and my mother says I'm not even allowed to date until I come of age at 13, and then only supervised. Harry complained bitterly. Fred and George both draped an arm over him and gave his untidy hair matching noogies with their knuckles. There, baby Hufflepuff, offered George, crushing rejection, heartbreak, drama, angry ex-hexing. Offered Fred and more are just a few years away, concluded George. Angelina, Katie, and Alicia all threw bits of food at Fred and George, who caught and ate it quite without any visible shame. When approached before potions class by his favorite Slytherin potioner, 2 reformed cauldron killers, and a decently responsible Hufflepuff about making a Mortentia in class, Professor Snape was deeply suspicious. Why would I permit you to make such a dangerous and legally restrictive potion in my class? Asked Professor Snape with his trademark drawl. We have an interest in antidotes, and the Mortentia antidote is a key study, as only a superior grade antidote will work against any given strength of a Mortentia. Antidotes that are weaker will have no effect whatsoever, said Millicent, the picture of a student eager to undertake an advanced project out of love of learning. And you expect me to believe that the four of you wish to brew some sort of experimental batch of a Mortentia the week before midterms because you have too much free time, drawled Snape, as if amused to see what new lie the little snakelet would spin. It's to stop Lockhart, the pervert, said Hermione. Could you be any more Hufflepuff? Morgana's tits, I'm embarrassed to be standing next to you. You don't just admit you want to make an illegal potion to use against a professor to a professor, whispered Millicent so fiercely she may as well have shouted. He's not a professor, he's a prat, and a pervert, Hermione said firmly, then with a look of dawning horror turned to Professor Snape, who was also looking on in horror at this whole conversation. Not you, Professor. We have the deepest respect for your skills and integrity as a professor and potioner, Hermione said in a gush. Neville decided to bring this conversation to an end before it got any more Hermione and offered simply. Noodle, that's Harry's snake familiar. Figures Lockhart is using some kind of a Mortentia-based perfume to do some sort of creepy love mojo on all the girls, all his fans at events, and even the female teachers here for some kind of pervy reasons. That last bit is Hermione, but Noodle is firm on the Mortentia bit. Neville offered with the sort of open honesty that made Snape develop a serious headache. Stop, said Snape, holding up his wand and casting a silent lumos to light his wand tip. Pointing it at his head, he said loudly, Oblivate, pretending to cast the charm for wiping out memory. I have just wiped the last several tragic minutes of conversation from my memory. The loss of brain cells having already occurred, I consider this to be more destruction of evidence than brain surgery. I now remember nothing past a very interesting study of antidotes based on an attempt to improve on the standard of Mortentia, said Professor Snape. Turning to Millicent, he nodded regally. You may proceed. As they turned to set up a special cauldron for group work behind the rest of the class, working on a much less advanced potion for unsticking spider silk. As Millicent went to join her friends, Snape caught her arm and muttered low enough to not be heard by any but Millicent. Control your Hufflepuffs. When dealing with professors, remember Slytherin House first rule. Snape muttered. Do not get caught. Millicent nodded in total agreement. As class progressed, Snape found himself fascinated very much against his will. The four young students formed a potion-making team that was easily at the level of experienced owl students. But that was not what fascinated him. The magic of the dungeon was a part of him. He had been marked by his peers for brewing in a school when he could have had his own lab, or some corporate lab far better funded, but the subtle science of potion was only the first step upon the path. The true path to mastery lay in the art beyond the recipe, beyond the method. Magic was alive. Magic was aware, and magic was mutable. Magic had moods and currents. It changed for reasons that greater minds than his had failed horribly in attempting to map. But it was in the end a living, breathing thing. In this place, in his dungeon, he knew the breath of magic. He knew its heartbeat. He could feel its moods, and he regularly modified his potion process by instinct, knowing that by moving more in tune to magic's flow, he could create a potion whose efficacy was above what was theoretically possible. That is why he never left. In this place, Severus Snape was not simply a potion master, he was a potion god. Magic was waking as the four began to work. Snape could feel it. The slow, lazy currents of magic from the deep pools and silent wells of the Hogwarts wards and their anchoring ley lines were like the ocean. Slow-moving tides were the most you would ever see or feel. Yet now those tides were racing to swirl around the cauldron of four second-year students, and a snake who gathered around a child's attempt to improve one of the most complicated and restricted of potions. Granger wove fire without bothering to use her wand. The Potter gathered thick streams of potion fumes and wove them back into the bubbling mix, stirring without touching, as if the touch of outside magic should not shatter the very effects they were trying to coax out of the blending ingredients. And yet, it didn't. Longbottom's eyes were closed, yet he worked his blade and pestle in turn, adding ingredients as he chanted at times that were spurred by something he felt but did not see. Snape listened and found in shock that Longbottom and Bulstrode were chanting in call and response, two halves of one chant, as if between them they could control what the magic that roared into the cauldron from the whirlpool of Hogwarts power that was sinking into that potion cauldron as if it was a huge wardstone or ley line, not a common iron pot, well past its prime, and having suffered the use of many a less than talented student. Strangest of all, the chanting of Neville and Bulstrode was joined by Potter and Granger, one voice that spoke in turn from four throats, sometimes singular, sometimes pairs, or all four together. The language the spoke made his forearm burn and his blood run cold, for it was the language of his dark lord. The snake, Noodle, swayed in the fumes like a dark god, his black eyes staring back into Snape's own as it began to lend its own voice to the chant, before it lunged forward, and two streams of venom fell into the swirling mists of Potter's potion, fume vortex to be stirred into the love potion, as if the venom of the second most dangerous magical snake could somehow be added to a love potion without killing whoever touched it. Yet Snape felt it, felt the rush of the tide as the power rushing into the potion peaked, and then rushed back in a wave of release, as the roiling storm of power and chaos in the cauldron settled into a new steady throb of potency. Snape watched as four humans fell in a grinning, sweaty, and clearly exhausted mess, while the rune-marked rock viper hissed contentedly above the cauldron. The entire potion class had stopped what they should have been doing to observe a reaction powerful enough that even they could feel it, and yet somehow correct enough to keep Professor Snape frozen in fascination, instead of urgently banishing whatever dangerous student nonsense was about to endanger Cauldron and children in his precious dungeon. Millicent looked up, her face a mass of sweat, her hair lank against her head as she turned to face her housemaster. "Did we do it?" she asked. Snape drew out his testing kit from his special pouches in his sleeve with all drama, seeking comfort in the familiar actions. As he began his testing, he asked the question that had been bothering him. "Miss Bulstrode, what exactly was that you just performed? Do not waste my time passing it off as simply potion-making." Snape asked quietly. "A ritual. We are an elemental quartet, balanced and trained in coven rituals." Millicent said very quietly, making sure her face was blocked by Snape's body so no one could overhear it. In Parseltongue, Snape asked the dangerous question softest of all. "What better tongue than Slytherin's own for working true magic?" Noodle hissed, and Millicent translated. Glancing at the snake hurriedly, Snape hissed quietly, and the venom, a drop of his venom could drop a centaur. Noodle laughed and bowed to Snape. "Tell Death-Eating Crow it would take 4 drops of my venom to kill an adult centaur in fighting shape, but the potion called for my venom to reach perfection. They are my circle. When they call, I answer." When Millicent translated verbatim, Snape flinched but nodded. This was magic he had only seen the Dark Lord himself trifle with, and even then, alone. Dumbledore had taken steps to make sure such rituals would never be allowed again, yet his reach was not ever going to reach the most ancient and noble houses, even if it should have held inside Hogwarts. Snape looked at the testing results, then very slowly repeated his testing, in a voice that sounded as casual as the house master of Slytherin could possibly make it. He announced his results. "This potion is perhaps a dozen times beyond the strongest published strength of a Mortentia on record. 3 times stronger than my own," Snape said with the mix of arrogance and humble that marked a true master of potions. "I suggest you bottle all of it. Should Dumbledore find you have created such a potent potion, or one of those tiresome drones in the Ministry, I suspect you will have problems." Snape paused, and then brusquely continued. "As to your project, I suspect an antidote made from this will require a remarkably small amount to not only neutralize, but antagonize any known Amortentia brew." Turning to his snakelet, he offered a sigh. Normally, for such a potion, a relatively generous house point reward would be expected. Millicent Bulstrode shot both her arms forward as she pled swiftly. "No, thank you, sir, please. If we could just pretend nothing special at all happened. She trailed off, and the two Slytherins shared a nod of understanding. Dumbledore was the unquestioned master of Hogwarts. Inside these walls, there were few powers that could protect you from his actual wrath. They were trudging back from the dungeon, exhausted, elated, and fairly hungry when they heard the voice. So hungry, kill, rend, eat. The voice hissed, but so powerfully the walls and floor trembled, the very magic of the air shook with the potency of that voice. Noodle, who had been most of the way to sleep after his exertions, sharp bolt awake and hissed. Run, flee, quickly. The king hunts. Noodle hissed and dropped from Harry's shoulders to race backwards towards the dungeons. Harry took a second to process that voice. The power in it made his eyes burn, made his mouth drool, and his blood boil. Something in it made him hunger for something denied him, something he needed. He was lost in a moment of something like lust when Hermione shocked him back to reality. You will not kill people, Hermione hissed, chasing after the voice. It's in the walls, shouted Millicent. It's bloody fast, shouted Neville, giving chase to the voice. It's going to kill someone, shouted Hermione, chasing after the pair of beaters in better running shape than her. Harry snapped out of his daze to follow, hissing his own command with a power he didn't quite understand how he knew to infuse. Dollar Mousegiver spoke true. You will not kill people. You will not eat people. Harry hissed as he ran. Kill, rend, eat. The air commands. I obey. The voice, now somehow very far ahead and moving parallel to the staircase as it shot upwards, argued, still powerful enough to shake the air. You will obey me, Harry demanded, his vision going gold then red as rage held up within him at being questioned, his own power beating the air with his anger. Not kill people. The greater voice hissed in clear anger. So hungry, so hungry. It trailed off as they ran headfirst into Percy Weasley, who shouted at them. No running in the halls, and enough of that creepy hissing. You are scaring students. 5 points each from Hufflepuff and Slytherin. Now, what do you think you are doing? Percy said, puffing out his rather shallow chest in self-importance and standing very firmly in the way. Merlin's left droopy nut, rasped Neville. Didn't you hear that great ruddy voice hissing in the walls that it was going to kill and eat someone? It terrified Noodle into bolting for the dungeons, and that snake charged at trolls, argued Neville. I only heard you lot hissing, and there is nothing in the walls. The prefects would have been told. Percy sniffed haughtily. Just then a scream sounded from upstairs. Not a student scream, a very broken, very adult scream. The scream of a man who has just lost his everything. Running upstairs, they found Filch the caretaker kneeling in a pool of water by Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. He was staring brokenly at the hanging figure of his cat, Mrs. Norris. She was hanging from the torch sconce, utterly unmoving. There was writing in blood on the wall behind her. Draco Malfoy, his cronies Crabbe and Goyle like bookends behind him, read the writing in blood and sneered down at them as the quartet raced up the stairs. Enemies of the air beware. The Chamber of Secrets is open. Malfoy read. He laughed. Did you hear that, mudbloods? That is the heir of Slytherin. He has opened the Chamber of Secrets, and he's finally going to cleanse Hogwarts of all the filth. Draco sneered, clearly preening in the reflected glory of this promised future. Filch looked up at the quartet of known parlor-tongue speakers and did what passed for arithmancy for the paranoid squib and got a wrong answer. You killed my cat. You are the heirs of Slytherin, and you killed my cat because you knew I was a squib. You didn't even kill me, but my cat. Filch hit Harry like a thin, rather bony version of the Hogwarts Express. His punch was nothing special, but it caused Harry to see stars briefly. Being a beater, he was used to bludgers to the head, so he got a hand in the way of the next few, but Filch was inconsolable and uncontrollable. Mrs. Norris never done nothing to you. She's all I have in this whole world. You ain't got no reason to kill her just because I'm a squib. I ain't got no place to go, and the only reason I stay here is so I can afford to keep her, and you dirty brat's gone and murdered her. Filch said, finally dissolving into tears and collapsing limp in Neville and Millicent's arms as they pulled him off Harry. By this time, McGonagall and Dumbledore had already arrived from 2 different directions. McGonagall was reading the writing in blood and going very pale, while Dumbledore was poking Mrs. Norris with his wand. Gilderoy Lockhart arrived then and struck a pose before speaking. Killed by black magic. It's a shame I wasn't here. I dealt with a nasty bit of this a few years back in Borneo, as covered in my Black Death in Borneo book. Only 10 sickles in Flourish and Blarts, 12 for a signed copy. I have the perfect counter curse, but of course it's too late now. Dumbledore looked up sharply, less than amused. You may relax, Mr. Filch. Mrs. Norris is not dead. She will in fact be entirely fine in a few weeks when I have had a chance to prepare the proper counter. Dumbledore said softly, "Not dead," shouted Draco, sounding almost offended. Dumbledore nodded. "Not dead, Mr. Malfoy. Petrified, just as happened the last time the chamber opened. There was only the one death before it closed on its own, even then." Draco's face was a study of disgust, even as the assembled students were a mix of the more expected fear and horror. "Professor," these students were hissing something in that serpent language as they were running up here. "Perhaps they should be questioned about being this heir of Slytherin." Percy Weasley said, pointing an accusatory finger directly at Harry Potter. Draco broke his Slytherin calm then and shouted, "Potter, Potter, you think a half-blood goblin could be the heir of Slytherin? You must be out of what passes for a Gryffindor mind." Draco shouted, "Be quiet, Malfoy. You aren't even the heir of Weasley. There are a fair few of us older than you after all. No one cares what you think." Percy Weasley said in perhaps his least diplomatic offering ever. Luckily, Crabbe and Goyle caught Draco before he could attack a Gryffindor prefect in front of both the head of Gryffindor House and the headmaster, but it was a near-run thing. Dumbledore made a calming gesture. "Peace, Mr. Malfoy, peace," Dumbledore offered. "If you will note, this blood is dry, which indicates that the petrification and writing happened some dozens of minutes ago, at least, while Mr. Potter and his friends were observed by Prefect Weasley as coming from the potions dungeons, floors away from here at that time. I will ask students to now proceed to your next class and leave this matter in the hands of your professors." Dumbledore concluded, but his eyes were troubled, giving lie to the relaxed expression on his face.